can all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha. Keeping the palms joined. You put the palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. How are you all doing today? Hanging in all right? All right. Good to see you all here. We're back at it. It's a never-ending practice. I just said to somebody as they entered, and I won't point out who it was, although I think you just gave it away. And as we're training our new, Dharma Bum hosts, and they've so thoroughly checked you at the door, when he asked one individual in the room, if they'd been here before, and this individual said yes many times, and as I was walking out, I heard this dialogue, and I said they should be a polished pearl by now. But instead, not quite a polished pearl yet. Close though, I'm sure, very close. And it's, I often, I try to make light of this practice. And what I mean by that is it can be really difficult and very daunting task in a way, almost to begin to learn about Buddhist practice and teachings. And I say this a lot, but we read gentle Buddhist books, and whether it's a Thich Nhat Hanh or Pema Chodron or whatever it is we're kind of reading, and we see all this stuff, or you listen to people sit up here, or any meditation places you go, and it all sounds and reads like really nice and so simple, and this should be so easy. And then we go into the world and it's not. And it's so difficult. And that's why when I started, this piece, it's important to understand that the gentleness that we have toward ourselves, because so often with many things in our lives, we've been so critical, so judgmental, pretty hard on ourselves with a lot of things. And with Buddhist practice, my suggestion is to try to stay away from being hard on yourself with regards to how am I doing with it? And just try to settle into embracing the fact I'm still at it, and be proud of that. And, for me, I think that's been a very important piece. And one of the, beauties and joys of, leading classes the last 10, 15 years is it means I get to continue to show up and practice. And I always say to people, the number is different every time, but, I say if I can do half the stuff every day that I sit up here and talk about, wow, that would be phenomenal, right? Just because, and this is not just about me, but keep this in mind with most Buddhist people who lead stuff, just because they say all this wonderful, gentle, kind Buddhist stuff and practices doesn't mean we can do them all either. It doesn't mean we don't have challenges or difficulties or frustrations or emotions just like the rest of you, right? And I bring this up just to remind us all that it's a practice. It's not about becoming that, perfect polished jewel and this, flawless human being. Um, it's about getting to know and love what we might view as flaws and making peace with them. And then learning to be kinder and gentler from this moment on going forward. So I think it's always important to just be proud of yourself for continuously showing up. And again, what I don't mean here necessarily, I just mean showing up to practice. Showing up each day and saying to yourself, I want to be a kinder, gentler person and suffer less today than I did yesterday. And I think that's a very beautiful practice. So thank you all for showing up. And to, as always, our millions of YouTube followers, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you here. Feel free to chime in online, introduce yourself, say hello as you are. So we'll start with the meditation practice. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. Mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Okay, don't judge your practice. Meaning, don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. We'll hear sounds inside, outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. However you're seated, if you're on a cushion, often it helps sliding to the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Same thing on a chair or bench. Just trying to sit up straight, relaxing the shoulders. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap, whatever's comfortable. If you need to move during meditation, just gently move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator, it just means your leg hurts or you have an itch. I'll guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with the eyes closed, if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. We'll start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgment from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet. Just sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. knowing with each breath there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, it's not from anything I said. It's not from how we sit and hold the hands across the legs. It's not from the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppat, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in and where you think you're going, Your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly and peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way we responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not necessarily easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often we think it is. If your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, then meditation won't fix that. But it helps you become aware why your life may be a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess. So then we can actually begin to make changes in our lives. And this is, for many people, I think the most difficult realizations is recognizing that meditation practice, Buddhist practice, is not separate from your life. It's not as if we have our life outside there and then we go do this Buddhist thing. Because as long as we have that approach, then this is always going to be the thing that you're going to do outside of your everyday life. But as the Buddha taught, it's meant to be brought into your everyday life. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. Sitting, breathing, becoming aware of what you think, say, and do. That's it. And that can be difficult at times. But as I mentioned earlier, if you learn to be patient with yourself and give yourself some time, then slowly life can change a bit outside of here. But it's not a race. It's not a quick fix. It takes time. So we stay at it. And that's the Buddhist teachings on diligence. You keep working at it. You just keep practicing. And you may see positive changes, differences or I should say, opening of views in your life. Things that really make you become aware of why you're struggling so much. And I don't mean to assume that anyone here is struggling, but most people that show up at places like this are struggling with something in their life. They usually don't show up out of complete boredom. So when you explore your struggling, whatever that may be, your challenges, your difficulties, your conflicts, again, as I mentioned earlier, do that with some loving kindness and compassion towards yourself. But don't be afraid to really look at like a mirror and reflect on, where am I struggling? What are my difficulties? What are my challenges? What are the conflicts I'm having? And also asking ourselves very honestly what role we play in that. So I know it'd be easier to just blame everybody else for everything that's going on in our lives, but we have to take some responsibility for it, unfortunately. So, but the good news about that is then we have the ability to make changes. So with that, I'll pause. And for me, I really just prefer to open up to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice. And we'll use the rest of our brief time this evening, and I'll just respond to whatever's on your mind. And again, to all of our YouTube folks, thanks for being here. There's a chat box somewhere on your screen. I see you're all already using it, but feel free to type in any questions you may have there as well, and I can respond. So we'll open up to questions.
Been beginning to read about Buddhism, and today I was reading a little bit about suffering, and just trying to gain kind of a deeper understanding. It sounded like, by my readings, that suffering is kind of inherent to human life, and there's a universality to it. But what to do with it? Is it just kind of acceptance of that, or
Yeah,
what?
great question. So just to repeat for those who maybe didn't hear it online here virtually, you beginning to read about Buddhism, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but if I miss it completely, just let me know. Beginning to read about Buddhism and came across suffering, probably pretty early on in the book, and it's where they start. Those darn Buddhists are always so negative and miserable. Can't we start with the good stuff? So you're just kind of curious. What do we do with that suffering? Do we just embrace it, accept it? I forget the word you used. Did you say embrace or accept or accept? Yeah. What do we do with it? So is that a fair retelling of your question?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So to kind of give it a little bit of context with the word suffering, it comes from the word dukkha. All right. And when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, which I'll get to in a minute, but let me just start with dukkha for a second. The translation of dukkha in English often ends up as suffering. And I think that's, as many I've learned from and studied from over the years, a really terrible translation of the word dukkha. A lot of words in Sanskrit or Pali don't translate so well, as many languages, they just don't translate so well into other languages. And this is definitely one of them. Because when you look at the word suffering, at least in the English language, what does that word mean to you? Suffering. How does that sound? Painful, right? And yes, that does exist. But let me ask you this. Do you like mayonnaise? You do? I always have a 50-50 shot with that example. And, you win some, you lose some. Who here doesn't like mayonnaise? Somebody, just play along. Danielle, do you like mayonnaise?
Depends.
Depends.
I'm not a big fan.
What are you not a fan of when you eat a deli sandwich?
Ketchup.
Ketchup. All right, there we go. We'll go with ketchup. I want to hear. I'm curious now what you don't like also.
Olives.
Olives.
Yeah.
I also hate olives, so I'm with you. All right. And what's your name?
Matt.
Matt. Okay. So Matt doesn't like ketchup. Danielle doesn't like olives. You go up to deli. You order a sandwich. It comes back. What do you tell them when you order it? No ketchup, no olives. Not a trick question here. You get the sandwich, and there's olives and ketchup on it. Hopefully not together. How does that make you feel?
Sad?
Sad?
Yeah. Or not sad, just upset.
Upset?
Yeah.
Now, would you consider that feeling the same thing as suffering? No, it is, according to dukkha. So that's why I really want to start here with breaking down what does the translation of the word actually mean. Discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction, something a little bit out of joint, out of place, right? Things that just don't go our way. That's what dukkha is. But when we read about it in text, it usually just says, life is suffering. I had a friend years ago who said that 25 years ago in college, he came across a Buddhist book and he read Life is Suffering, and he never turned to page 2 because he thought, well, those Buddhists are so miserable and depressing. Why do we just want to focus on suffering? Well, page 2 begins to explore really what you're asking about. But what we first have to begin with is understanding that our entire life is like ordering a deli sandwich and ending up with ketchup on it. And our entire life is also like ordering a deli sandwich and getting exactly what you wanted, right? And everywhere in between. So suffering is so extreme, heavy, death, loss, deep trauma, pain. Like these things do exist. And this is also dukkha. But so is getting your food prepared differently from how you want it, right? So is the temperature outside. It's too hot, it's too cold. I need the air conditioning, I need the heat, right? Matt, do you ever put a shirt on and think, I don't really like how I look in this shirt? Often. Well, good example then, all right? I'm 1 for 2. So that's dukkha also. Because at that moment, you are experiencing discomfort. So what the Buddha said is our entire life is filled every single day with moments of dukkha. It doesn't mean, and this is often, and this is the main reason I don't like that translation of the word into suffering, is it makes it sound like all of life just sucks. And it doesn't. Life can be really beautiful and pleasant and joyful and, happy. But it can also be, I don't like the sandwich, I don't like the shirt, I don't like the temperature. It's all of those things. You with me so far? So then, what do we do with that? That's really what your question is about, right? What do we do with this suffering? Do we embrace it? Do we accept it? Let me start with the word accepting, because that's the word you used, right? When we accept something, you ever have someone who you don't like their views? It's a pretty easy one, right? I just like to give very concrete examples because I think it helps. Like today, you probably had lots of people who you didn't agree with their views. And so you say, well, I love them, so I'm going to accept their views. But when you say, I don't agree with them, but I love them, so I'm going to accept their views, you know what you're really saying? I'm right, you're wrong. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that's very often this idea of, I don't agree with you, but I love you, I care about you, so I'll accept you, but you're still wrong. Right? Ultimately, and I'm going to give some basic teachings to this, your question is not about embracing or accepting dukkha, or the response to your question about that. It's just to recognize it exists. Whether we embrace it or accept it or not, doesn't change the fact that it exists. Right? So the first thing the Buddha said is the Four Noble Truths is life is filled with dukkha. The second thing, which is ultimately the response to your question, what do we do with it? We become aware of the cause of it. That's the second noble truth. What is the cause of our dukkha, the cause of our suffering? And the Buddha said this is what's known as the 3 poisons: greed, anger, and ignorance. Greedy because we want more. We want different. We want change. We want our sandwich made properly. Right? So we overcome greed with generosity. We give smiles, we give attention, we give hugs, we give support, we give an ear for people to listen, to listen to people. The Buddha said the greatest gift of giving is to give the Dharma. And I don't mean by giving like Buddhist talks, but like giving people kindness and compassion. That's the greatest gift. The second cause of our dukkha is anger. We're angry at the way things go constantly. And so he said to overcome anger, practice compassion. Practice endless compassion. Especially towards those that you disagree with or you don't like. Those are the fun ones, It's one thing to think about being compassionate towards self and loved ones. It's another thing to think about being compassionate towards those that you really just dislike. That's hard. And the third cause of our suffering is ignorance. And ignorance, to me, I've always loved this teaching, and to explain it this way is ignoring the truth. Now, it's not truth as spoken by the Buddha. I want to clarify that. It's the true nature of reality, things as they are. There's a great kind of Zen teaching very specifically that says, once you see something and observe it, right? So imagine you've looked at something. The moment you start to intellectually think about it and describe it, it is no longer what it is. You're now adding your interpretation of that object or whatever it may be. I was thinking of pizza, so, right? Once I taste pizza and I start talking about it, I'm no longer experiencing the taste. And what I'm describing isn't even the taste. It's my interpretation of it, right? So we overcome ignorance with the practice of wisdom. And this is a tough one because the ultimate question, what is wisdom, right? And for me, I've always approached wisdom. Subhuti, one of the Buddhist disciples, was asked to give a discourse on wisdom. And he said nothing. And the Buddha said, good job, right? I've always looked at wisdom as the absence of ignorance. So, do you know when you're doing harmful things to self or others, or mean things to self or others, or destructive things to self or others, or our intentions aren't so pure? A lot of times we often know those things. So if we do those things less, that's cultivating and practicing wisdom. Thich Nhat Hanh says, you familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh? So great Vietnamese Buddhist master, passed just recently, a few months back. But he said nirvana is freedom from views. And the way I really translate this in my own practice is not so much that I'm going to stop having views. I will always have views. But the question is, am I so, and this ties into the ignorance, am I so attached to them that I won't even consider somebody else's views? So, does that help a little bit? It's not a simple, it's a simple teaching and a lifelong practice. First thing he said is we suffer. The second thing he said is the cause, the greed, anger, ignorance. The third noble truth is nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. And the fourth is the path. That's the Eightfold Path. Working on having correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. All available on Google and in just about every Buddhist book you're going to find. But then the question is, can we practice that? Right? So, what do we do with suffering? Observe it. See it for what it really is. It's an experience of the present moment that is not aligning with how we want it to be. And then look at why do we want it to be differently. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a fundamental, simple teaching, but it really, for me, I loved years ago, I read somewhere that it said that the entire body of the Buddhist teachings is in the Four Noble Truths. Like, that's it. Everything is right there. Now, that won't usually satisfy us, and we'll keep reading more and studying more and learning more. But it's all in that first teaching.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I've been reading a lot as well, and I feel like I've learned a lot, but I haven't figured out like what is something that I can do to like start my, I guess, practice. Like, what can I do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure.
To, other than just continuing to read, and I guess I'm here.
Sure. Good question. So the question is, you've been studying and reading a lot. And your question is, what can you do to start your practice other than continuing to read and coming to a place like this? Yeah? I just repeat it because virtually they can't always hear the questions.
Right.
So I'm glad you added the last part, because that's where I would have started with keep showing up. And when I say that, I truly don't necessarily mean, I mean, I'm not saying I don't want you here, but I don't mean like you must come to the Dharma Bum temple. But showing up to practice with Sangha, with community, is super important. Because in most people's lives, you know, we're not nuns or monks living in monasteries, and most of our lives are not surrounded by family and friends and colleagues and whatever that are trying to integrate Buddhism into their life. It's just not typical in this culture. So we show up to places like this to continuously be reminded and be supported as we try to figure out how to do what you're asking about, right? And so you continue to read, you continue to study, but I want to kind of present it in maybe differently than how you're seeing it. At least what I got from your question is that I almost heard from your question that you think there's some, like, I don't want to say big, but like some bigger thing or grander thing that you're supposed to be doing to like be more Buddhist, because that's a common misconception early on. I went through it, 20 years ago, where I was like, okay, well, I've read some books, I've gone to temple a few times, like now I want to be a real Buddhist. Like, what does that mean? And I was really attached to that for a while. Like, what does it mean to be a real Buddhist? And what I eventually realized was being a real Buddhist wasn't about being Buddhist at all. My master always said you could shave your head and put on a robe and take vows, but that won't make you a Buddhist. What makes you Buddhist is what's in your heart and what's in your mind. And ultimately, that's not even about being Buddhist. It's just about being a good person, right? So what you can do is to continue to practice what you're reading and learning in your life. I'll give you, does that make sense so far? A couple different things. And if you want to come out here and sweep leaves every day, you can do that, and I'll call you Buddhist if you'd like. But a couple things you can practically do. And I got, like a million little things like this, but look at the cause of our suffering: greed, anger, ignorance. So one thing you can do is you can do it a number of different ways, but spend one day, say tomorrow, and say, what's your name? Demetrius. So you're going to say to yourself, tomorrow, Demetrius, all I'm going to do is focus on my greed. And I'm just going to watch it. I'm going to watch, where am I greedy in my life? Is it with food? Is it with clothes? Is it with time? Is it with people? Is it with, other material possessions? Like, just spend all day tomorrow. I mean, in your normal routine, right? I don't mean like calling in sick for work or whatever and just saying, sorry, folks, I'm closed off. I'm going to focus on my greed today. Live your day tomorrow, however that may be. But in the back of your mind and in the front of your mind and in your heart, ask yourself, where am I greedy? Not in a judgment way to be like, oh, I'm a terrible person, but recognize, where am I seeking, craving, and desiring more than what I actually need? And if you're, a lot of people like to journal, write stuff down. If you're someone who wants to write it down, like, most of us could write down like 30 things in one day that we have consumed more than what we actually need. You can do that for a day. And then the next day say, okay, now I'm going to focus on the second cause of suffering, which is anger. And begin to notice, where am I angry? And the third day, where am I ignoring reality and making it all about my views? And spend a day on that. So truly, the greatest masters I've ever learned from have always said the greatest thing you can do, which is your question, how can I be, just keep practicing. Because if you are less greedy, less angry, less ignorant, that will change your life and the life of those around you and those you don't know. That make sense?
Yes.
So, yeah. Hope that's helpful. Yeah. Other thoughts? Questions? There was a response here from Andrew, I believe, and I think it was I'm guessing, Andrew, in response to Matt's question about, the suffering, he says, soften your relationship with it, which is a really beautiful, concise, which is something I know nothing about, way of responding to your question. Yeah. Soften your relationship to your suffering. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions? Or anything that come up from what I just shared on the challenges. And you're all able to do those practices as well. Feel free to jot them down tomorrow. It can be kind of shocking at first. You're like, wow, I'm just a greedy, angry, ignorant person. And then you soften your relationship to that and say, I'll be all right. What else?
I just have a comment.
Yeah.
When I think about greed and the ways that I'm greedy, I think it's hard for me to define what I need versus what I want. And so
Yeah.
trying to figure out where that line is.
Yeah.
Like how much do you really need?
Yeah. So the comment was, when you think about greed, it's hard for you to determine the difference between what do you need and what do you want, right? And where do you draw that line between what you actually need versus what you want? Yeah, this is a super fun one because we're so good at justifying in our heads things we actually have convinced ourselves that we need. Oh, I need it. I mean, you can all fill in the blanks, right? I need this. Really? Do we really need it? Or do we want it? Now, this requires tremendous amount of you look at the precepts of honesty and being truthful. You don't have to share this with anyone. This can be your own fun, messed up game of recognizing how quickly we can spin something in our head from being something that we want and automatically convince ourselves we need it and justify in our own mind why we need it. So let's make this very simple. Need. What do we need to be alive? Say again?
Food, water.
Food, water?
Clothing, shelter.
You mean connection.
No.
Air.
Air. The other two comments were, I think someone said shelter. Someone said love and connection. We want shelter for safety and protection. We want love and connection to feel good. I'm not suggesting we should not have those things. Let's really break down needs and wants. Food, water, air. What do we need to be alive? Food, water, air. That's it. Anything after that become things we want. And then we give justification and reason for why we want them, which is totally okay. I'm not sitting here bashing that. I just want to be very clear on that. All right. Let me jump to the Buddha as an example. When he left home as the life of the prince and had all the wealth and all the riches and all the women and everything you could imagine 2,500 years ago in India, he renounced. That's why there's an image of him cutting off his princely hair, and he began shaving his head, or cutting off the long hair, and that's where the tradition of shaving the head comes from. But he renounced all worldly possessions, and he lived with 7 items. Again, I'm not suggesting that we all do this. I'm just giving you the story. He lived with 7 items, and I'll close with this thought. They were a robe, a needle and thread to sew the robe, a razor to shave his head, a block or some sort of thing to sharpen the razor, a kind of strainer that he used to sift for water to like sift out bugs, or some sort of like bowl, and robe, needle, thread, razor, sharpener, bowl, and something else for water, so bugs weren't harmed. That's all I had. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got like 8 objects right here. Right? I don't need any of them. I want them. So start there. Start with really asking yourselves the difference between needs and wants. And just because society or family or friends or relationships or every billion-dollar advertisement out there says this is what we need, and we've had that flooded into our head since the moment we were born, that we don't even ponder the remote possibility that we don't need that. Right? How many shirts do we need to live? 1. How many do we have? A lot. So then we could ask ourselves, like, what was it? So how many shirts do you have? Could not count. I picked a good one here. So let's just, for numbers' sake, you have over 100? Probably. Okay, good. Thank you for playing along. So you have over 100 shirts. Could you, well, go easy on you. Could you get rid of 30 of them and still live and be okay? Yeah? Definitely. So I've been challenging people with this for years. If you get rid of 30 shirts that you have, that means 30 people who don't have a shirt, living on the streets, living in shelters, right? They get a new shirt. Rachel's house downtown for abused women. It's a place we donate so much stuff to. You could take 30 shirts down there, and 30 people would be thrilled to have new shirts. And you could probably still be okay with your 70, right? Now, just the thought of that for some people is really difficult. Now, the next challenge would be when you get rid of the 30, right? Would it be the 30 favorite shirts or the 30 least favorite shirts? So there's multiple levels. We'll go baby steps. Just pick out the 30 shirts that you don't like. But just for fun, sprinkle in 1 or 2 that like make you feel really good. Right? And give one of those away, knowing that that shirt that you gave away will make somebody feel even better potentially than you do. This is generosity. This is compassion. This is loving kindness. This is the practice of overcoming greed and overcoming this attachment to thinking that the shirts that we have or the clothes that we wear, the cars that we drive or the houses we're in, we think those mean something, that they give us some identity or sense of self. All this stuff does is it feeds our ego. I used to have over 100 shirts. I mean, when I started this in 2003, and I first went to the temple, and I won't get into the whole story now, but I had everything. And I went an extreme opposite. I went from having, my first master said, Jeff, you work so hard to make so much money to buy so many things. If you didn't have so many things, you wouldn't need so much money. You wouldn't have to work so hard. And that changed my life forever. So from 2003 to 2005, I went from making a lot of money and spending a lot of money to making almost no money and spending almost no money. And I found out, what do I need? What do I want? But I had to challenge myself, and it was difficult. to drastically change your life. And I'm not suggesting anybody take the extreme. That just is how I've always been. The middle path has always been very elusive for me. It's always been either all or nothing. So it's something I always struggle with. But when you start to give away stuff, you'll start to see what you need. So does that help at all?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I look forward to the report back on the on the shirts. All right. So with that, I think I'll close unless anybody else has any final thoughts or comments or anything. You're welcome. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred, man, the list is getting too long, to all of those who are suffering, all of those who've lost lives in the pandemic, to all of those in Ukraine suffering, to all of those who lost lives in the shooting in Texas, in Highland Park, Chicago, and all the family and friends who are suffering at this time. May they all be at peace and free from suffering. May we all be at peace and free from suffering. So at this time, I'd like to invite up before you scatter, our newly elected Dharma Bum host official to share our closing announcements. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to be that guy who reads right off the clipboard because they did not tell me how to do this today. So here we go. Hello, everyone. I am David. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 15 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, teachers, are not looking for students. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice with others, with you all. Just about every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone battling addiction, drugs, alcohol, or anything else for that matter. A family sangha for parents, kids, toddlers, and teens, which currently meets once a month. And we also offer a half-day silent retreat the first Saturday of the month with an RSVP required. Everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We also have a lending library right back there. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and bring it back whenever you are done with it. Thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.